Hello Space Fairies and welcome to another painting talk. By popular Twitter opinion, this painting talk is about teachers. When I first thought about doing a vlog about my teachers, there were a select few who immediately sprung to mind, and I realise now that this is probably because they were the ones who I knew and who taught me most recently. But also, they were just real characters and they're always going to be a huge part of my life, and in fact a huge part of who I am now. And they are Mr. Singhal, Miss Coombs, Miss Harris-Tanzer, Mr. Low-Wheeler, Mr. Pigeon, and Miss Fairhead. And they were kind of this roaming gang or clique at our school, the school being Maidstone Grammar School for Girls. So yeah, they were kind of this weird little group who had their own in-jokes. They even had, I think, a pet. Well, not a pet, they just had this joke where at any given time, one of them had to be carrying this length of plastic hose. And I think the joke was that it was never allowed to be left alone, so one of them always had to have it. And if they were holding it, then they had to look busy. So it didn't occur to us at the time, that whenever we saw someone rushing down the corridor carrying the hose, that they weren't doing something very important. They looked like they really needed to get this hose to one place. And no one made the connection that it was the same piece of hose, or that we never actually saw them doing anything with it. Except there was one teacher in their gang clique thing called Miss Goodsell. She was lovely. She was very shy and polite and quiet though, so when it was her turn to look after the hose, she would only do it if it was in a plastic carrier bag, bless her, whereas everyone else was more bravado about it, like, I really need to get this hose to B12 stat. And this set of teachers are largely responsible for my sense of humour, my interests, and even the way I behaved in school. Like Mr. Low-Wheeler, he was my media teacher, he let us get away with murder. At one point he facilitated us skipping lessons so that we could make a video which had nothing to do with our studies. It was a goodbye video for Mrs. Coombs, one of the other teachers, and he saw us outside of lessons one day. In fact, I think it might have been his lesson, but we were just kind of wandering around the school aimlessly with the camera, me and Daniel J Layton and a bunch of other renegades, and he comes out into the corridor. What are you doing? And we're like, we're making a video for Mrs. Coombs. And he was like, okay, I'll help you. And then he did, and he just abandoned whatever he was teaching to help us go around the school and film a goodbye video for another teacher. It sounds like I'm trying to really get them in trouble. I'm not. One of them is retired now anyway, so it's fine. But the point is, they were easygoing enough to allow their students the freedom to develop their skills in the way they wanted. So sure, I missed a few dozen English classes, but in the end I was off making videos with Dan, and guess what? I'm still making videos, so thank you, Mr. Low-Wheeler. And Mr. Singhal left when I was in year 12, but he was very funny, and he kind of sparked my passion in writing and just the English language in general. Because up until, I think, year 10, when I started my GCSEs, I hated English classes. I hated them so much. I hated doing the reading. I hated doing the writing. It really just bored me so much. I'd always wanted to do creative writing, but the passion for it was just kind of squished away by the need to read Of Mice and Men. But then come GCSE, he was so encouraging and was so ready to read anything that I threw his way, and I threw a lot of writing his way. I'm very sorry, Mr. Singhal. That it kind of ignited this passion to be more imaginative and more creative. And in fact, that's where, if you know any of my OCs, Arksan being one of them, they originated in a story that I wrote for my GCSE English class. I was like, you know what? I only needed to write 2 pages for my coursework, but I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to keep leaving these pages around for you to find and read. And now to this day, 11 years later, I still have this same story. I still have the same characters. I'm reworking them and rewriting them, but you can sure as hell bet that when that book gets finished, it's going to be dedicated to him. So teacher-wise, A-level was a fun time. I didn't have teachers that I didn't get along with. And this isn't even just hindsight. Like, this was at the time, I was like, wow, I have really cool teachers. Oh, except Mrs. Morgan. Mrs. Morgan. Oh, what was she? Well, she was my drama teacher. I don't think she was a drama or anything else. Basically, at some point, our very awesome, very talented drama teacher, Mrs. Coombs, retired, and in her place, we got Mrs. Morgan, who was a very ethereal, very strange lady who kept talking about her son Toby, who we're convinced was either 45 or a pair of curtains. And she was strict in a way that she really didn't need to be strict. Like, in the drama studio, where we did all our performances, we had this kind of chill-out area where we could just relax after particularly stressful scenes. And one day she just banned us. She just banned us from the chill out area, and she was just like, if we're going to be professional, you must sit or stand like a professional. No more lounging about, because it's just really bad for the energy. And I was just like, you're bad for the energy, fuck off. She was a piece of work. And as it turns out, not even a qualified piece of work. Anyways, it turns out she was a big old fraud and she disappeared with her son/curtains Toby. Who else did we have? Mr. Lesting. He was a character. He was a mad German man who used heavy objects to get our attention. I don't mean like he threw them at us, I mean he'd just drop them on the floor, they'd make a huge noise, and then the classroom would go silent. So different. But the first time he did this to us, it was actually a chemistry lesson, and we were in the chemistry labs, and our usual teacher was sick or something. So he was literally just there, like, babysitting us. And he says, work in silence, and then I'll let you know when your silence working time is over, all in a very heavy German accent. And so we work in silence, and we do as we're told. And then about 10 minutes towards the end of the lesson, there's this almighty crash, and I mean it's massive. It like ricochets and echoes around the room, and we're in the chemistry lab where there are dangerous things and chemicals and, you know, Bunsen burners, and we were like, oh shit, we've blown up the school. Turns out there was no explosion. It was just that Mr. Lesting had seen fit to announce the end of silent study time by dropping an encyclopedia from a 6-foot height. Mr. Cook, who was incredibly sarcastic, but made science fun, and at the time I was always really distracted by how he was the spitting image of Commander Riker from Star Trek The Next Generation. And then there was Dr. Griffin, my very wonderful art teacher who was whimsical and completely mad and taught me about colours and how to paint pictures of sound, and he owned a motorcycle, and in fact I dedicated my very first illustrated book to. Oh, and then there was Dr. Kylie. She was our head teacher for a bit. That was an era for Maidstone Girls Grammar. If you think you've got a teacher at MDGS who might remember Dr. Kylie, just ask them about Dr. Kylie. This is a woman who was a former nun and had absolutely no business running a school. And I'm pretty sure an actual vampire. She was very pale, had jet black hair, and I shit you not, I never once saw her go outside unless she was holding a black umbrella. I remember this one time, we had sports day during a heat wave, so it was the middle of June, it was kind of 32 degrees out, which is a big deal in England, and we had sports day on this huge open field with absolutely no shade. Bit of background, our school uniform was brown. Brown is a dark colour which absorbs a lot of heat, and this woman decided that every student needed to be sitting on that field for all 4 hours of sports day in full uniform or they'd get a detention. So that's 4 hours sitting in a heat wave in the sun without shade in brown woolen jumpers. Really smart woman. We had 8 girls faint that day and she told all of them off for faking it. She is also, however, responsible for my favourite ever threat. Jump forward a few months to flu season. She's hosting an assembly and everyone's kind of got a cold, everyone's ill, so there's a lot of coughing. And she thinks that all the girls coughing in the assembly is deliberate sabotage on her assembly. So she gets really flustered and she says, come on now girls, you stop that racket, you stop all this nonsense or I'll run among you. Can we go back? I'll run among you. She threatened to run among us. And I think that's just beautiful. And then there were kind of miscellaneous teachers who were all very helpful, but who I was probably scared of at some point. Like Miss Farnham, like Dr. Arnold, like Mr. Wilgus. Oh god, Mr. Wilgus. They were all kind of strict and therefore scary in their own way, and as an 11-year-old, yeah, that makes you automatically not like them, but now as an adult it makes me think, well, you know what, they had a good command of their class, they knew their subject well, they're not doing an easy job. Good for them, you scare those 11-year-olds, I'd do the same. Just like Miss Clarkson, oh my god. Miss Clarkson I only knew for 3 years, and that's the very first 3 years of secondary school. And anyone who does remember her just knows that you either die a hero or you live long enough to become Mrs. Clarkson. She was a terror, she never stopped shouting, but now, as an adult, I can't help but feel she was completely justified all the time. She was just this 80-year-old Yorkshire lady who just had the biggest chip on her shoulder about ever being around children. But now as an adult I think, oh yeah, you're right, we were awful people to be around. For example, me and my friend Harriet dropped an egg behind the cooker in year 7 accidentally, but it didn't break. So we thought, okay, we don't want to get yelled at for dropping our food on the floor because that's a health and safety violation. It's not broken, so we didn't have to clear it up. Maybe if we just stay quiet and don't tell her, It'll be fine. So we left it. We left the unbroken egg there. We left the unbroken egg there for 5 years. And in year 11, 5 years later, we went back. Oh my goodness, it was still there. Harriet hit it with a stick, and we didn't stick around long enough to know just how badly it smelled. I feel like the older I get, the more I'm going to sympathise with Miss Clarkson. The woman who terrorised me as a 12-year-old. In fact, I saw so many teachers as villains. I saw them as the bad guys in my life who just seemed to purposefully make my life more difficult. But the older I get and the more of my friends become teachers, I'm starting to realise these weren't just two-dimensional people who just lived in the school or had personal vendettas against individual students. In fact, I can pretty much guarantee that none of them were actually out to get anyone. You know, when you're a kid, you're just like, oh, mum, dad, they're out to get me. Oh, they gave me a detention because they hate me. No, I promise you, they don't think about you outside of school. They don't care. I mean, they care about your education, but they don't hate you because they probably don't really know you. I have so much respect for the people who taught me, even if I didn't at the time. And honestly, I can't thank any of them enough. You know, except Miss Morgan. What the fuck were you about, lady?